Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. Dawn, I am super happy to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Introduce yourself and let people know who you are.
Yeah, well, hello everybody. I am Dawn, as Guy has said. So I work for a company called HG, who is a tech investor. I've been there 6 years. Before that, I spent almost 20 years growing a big company called Capita. When I wasn't doing any of those things, I was also being a mum, I'd like to say a bit of a sports person, but I'm rubbish at all of them, but I try hard in all of the areas. So yeah, that's kind of me. The work me, the home me, the whole me.
I'm really clear that there's some great conversations I want to have with you about team and culture, and really to get your line of sight on that, because I've seen you navigate many a political situation and the different personalities. So I'm really keen to kind of get that input from you. I just sort of mentioned before we got going, there is that phrase, beware of wisdom that hasn't been earned. And the reason I share that is because I think there's something about people just having a sense of, so what is that journey? Maybe some of the ebbs and flows or some of the stepping stones that took you into a role that, generally speaking, does require experience. It does require insight. You can't generally just rock up out of university and go, boom, I'd like to be a partner for an organisation such as your own. So what is it that has given the foundation and maybe set you on the path that you're on? So just take us a little bit through that history and bring it to life for us.
Okay. So, well, actually, you mentioned university, so I'll start there because actually I didn't go. So I'm probably one of the few people that work in private equity today that actually didn't go to university. So I left school at 16, and that was a very deliberate choice. I had a happy childhood with hard-working parents, but they weren't in business. And so I didn't kind of have those role models. I didn't know anybody that had a job in business. My mum worked in the doctors and my dad was a builder. But what I did learn from them growing up is that I wanted independence, and that I wanted to be able to make my own choices. And I wanted some of those choices to be a different life than I'd seen growing up that my parents had, which although they were good, it was actually some tough times. We didn't have lots of money. And at the time, that was probably the biggest reason as well that influenced why I didn't go to university. It just simply wasn't an option, if you like, at that time for someone like me. But I was very ambitious. I was very hardworking. I'd had Saturday jobs from about the age of 12, and was furiously keen to be independent and to prove and make my way in the world. So I got a job at 16, and I was very lucky in that I got a job with a fantastic organisation. I think they're probably still fantastic today, but I don't know. But it was Bupa. And I had a female boss there who was an absolute rock star. She took me under her wing, and she became a very important role model in my life. And I think if I fast forward over the next few years, actually, I was very lucky in the career choices that I made, which were actually more driven by people even then, that I had great bosses, and they helped to probably give me skills and expose me to things that I didn't have growing up because I didn't grow up in a business environment. So I was very, very lucky to have good people around me even then. And eventually in 1999, I won't explain the story in detail, but I joined Capita. And I then spent years working for a pretty phenomenal individual, actually, Paul Pinder, who was a huge influence on me. And again, another role model, showed me the way, took me under his wing, gave me opportunities that I probably on paper didn't deserve to have, but he believed in me. And through the time of working at Capita, I went on to acquire loads of businesses. So doing M&A for somebody that had come from not formal training of how to do M&A was a fantastic opportunity for me, and it really taught me a lot. So Capita was all about a meritocracy, but building companies with great people, backing great entrepreneurs whose companies you're buying. And I'd say I don't know if the word is luck, but the harder you work, in my experience, the luckier you get. I worked incredibly hard during my time at Capita, and I grabbed every opportunity that was presented to me. And I had great role models that I listened to, and therefore I did pretty well there. And after 17 odd years, when I left, the last job I had there, I was Group COO. And that was crazy because there were 75,000 people. At that time, the revenue was about £6.5 billion. And probably what I should have said is when I joined as a telesales team leader in an acquisition. So to kind of go from that in what became a very large FTSE 100 company, a very serious business that employed thousands and thousands of people and that did very important things in society with public sector, but also was a cool tech investor as well. You know, I felt very, very blessed to have that opportunity. So I left Capita, I joined HG, which is where I've been for the last 6 years. And again, I feel very blessed to have joined a fantastic company that values individuals' diversity. And I don't just mean on gender, but I mean diversity of experience. So to be able to have the opportunity to join a private equity firm, having never worked in the sector, having not had any of the formal education that all of my colleagues will have had, I feel really blessed. But at the same time, I also feel like I've brought an awful lot to that organisation by way of showing them a different way. So I don't always fit in, it's fair to say, and I'll often have an opinion that is at the different end of the spectrum to some of my colleagues, but what I have with them is shared values. So that is completely consistent. And for that reason, I feel really blessed that for the last 6 years, I've had a blast working for one of the largest tech investors, in the Western world, a very successful tech investor. So that probably brings me up to speed on that. That feels like it's been my journey. I've done lots of other things along the way. I've had loads of things that didn't go well. They're always the ones that you learn the most from. But I also had lots of things that did go well. Actually, before you ask me another question, I'm going to say my standout thing from all of my journey has been work with great people who you admire, who you like, who you can learn from. Make sure you bloody well listen to them when they're giving you advice and when they're giving you feedback, even if it's feedback you don't like. So that's kind of been my journey. It's been one of influential people around me that I've learned from and listened to.
There's a huge amount there, and I know when you sum up decades like that in a couple of sentences, it's each one's a bottle of wine and a curry and a lot of stories to be told. I'm fascinated by a couple of things, which is telesales team leader to COO then in 17 years. I mean, that's the title of a book, isn't it?
It probably is.
How did you get noticed by Paul Pinder? Maybe the question is, what point did you realise I'm on somebody's radar here?
I had an opportunity in this job. I'd been there for about 6 months. And after 6 months of being there, I realised there were loads of things about the business that were completely rubbish and that I didn't like. And an opportunity came in to bid for a piece of work. Actually, it was with BAA, so the guys that run the airports in the UK. And actually, I saw this as a catalyst for change. So I wrote what I'd now, at the time I didn't really call it anything, but at the time I would, now looking back, it would be a bid response. So I came up with a solution to deliver work to this customer's need or client's need in a completely different way. And it was a way that would revolutionise this particular service. And it was a way that excited me and innovated me. So I went and said, hey, I've got this idea. I think we could do this. I think we could win this, but it really means that we need to change the way we do everything. But I think in the long term, this will be market leading. And I think you should let me do it. And so it was literally as simple as that. And I remember at the time, Paul saying to me, well, you can have no money to do it and you've got to do your day job. So there's no time available. But basically, give it a go, girl. Why don't you? And over the coming weeks and months, working with some other people in the company, we came up with a really compelling proposition, which we pitched to BAA. And I completely overpromised. I said I'd be the person personally delivering it. I was going to go and base myself in their offices and, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, this was going to be my life. And it was going to transform the outcome that they were looking for as well. But of course, I had no track record. It was a completely new solution, that untested. I had no people around me that had got any experience in this area either. But I just believed in it. And I really believed it was going to solve the problem that they were trying to solve. And I really wanted the chance to personally do it. So, cut the long story, we won the bid. And I then thought, oh, bloody hell, I'm now actually going to have to really do this. But needless to say, it did work. It was hard. It wasn't easy. It wasn't without a lot of challenge with the customer and also internal challenge with Capita. But eventually we got it going. We sold more contracts like that. And that was really the genesis of what became Capita's Human Capital Management Division. And, you know, kind of fast forward later, where did that end up? But, you know, it was a division of Capita with thousands of employees in it in the end, and delivering a whole range of different human capital management services. We did loads of M&A to supplement what we did, and it was a really powerful and impressive part of Capita. So, but it was that bid opportunity. It was kind of believing in yourself, sort of taking a bit of a personal risk, and finding and convincing somebody that had authority and influence to give you the chance. And I guess what Paul saw in me was probably some crazy enthusiastic girl that actually had quite a good idea, and I must have been convincing enough for him to go, yeah, go for it. So as much as I would say it was about me and the people that I worked with to deliver that, it was also about him as a leader being prepared to back somebody that didn't have a track record in doing this thing. It's a shame he's not here, because I'd like to ask him the question myself, actually. Why did you think that I could do that, and why did you back me?
Send him a message after this and go,
I'm going to text him, actually.
Yeah, I've always just... in fact, shall we pause? Should we pause the podcast for a minute?
Get him on the line.
Get him on the line. Say, Paul, I'm just on a podcast. I just have a quick question for you. See what he says. That's amazing, isn't it? There is a bit of a who dares wins thing going on there. I just wrote down, sometimes you just have to believe. You can put on the caricature of believing, you can say, of course, but I think maybe people with a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of experience, they know when the person in front of them believes.
Yeah, I think that's true. And yeah, the other thing that I would say, I mean, I've had loads of examples and loads of lessons where believing actually outweighed the chance of success, if you like, I don't know if that makes sense, but the fact that you've got the belief in it, and that you, even though you're trying to achieve something that's clearly not impossible, but that's very difficult, having that conviction, that passion, that consistent backing of yourself and backing of the idea, and being relentless, that is absolutely a vehicle that can help deliver successful outcomes. And I've experienced that so many times. And you know, if I got a minute just to give one little example, that's something that's really stand out. Yeah. So I remember at the end of the global financial crisis, we were, and it is a Capita example, but we were facing an incredibly difficult year in terms of delivering our results. And it is also including Paul again. But he was absolutely ruthless in his belief that we would still deliver our numbers that year, even though everybody else around the senior team, I wouldn't say we'd given up. I would say we were trying to be realistic, and we were trying to get him to see what we felt we could see, which is there's just no way we were going to get there. And he was bloody awful to work for that year, actually, because it seemed like he was so unreasonable. But and I use the word again, ruthless, his ruthless conviction that we will get to the numbers, we will deliver what we said we will. We won't let our shareholders down, we won't let ourselves down, we won't let our people down. And actually, we've got to keep going. And it was that ruthless pursuit of the outcome that he dragged us all screaming and kicking. By the end of the year, we all hated him, actually. And we wanted to kill him because he'd been so unreasonable. But when we got there, when we delivered that result, I can't tell you the feeling that gave to all of us. And however much I ever respected him, I learned more from him that year than I ever did. And my respect increased 100-fold, because it was not an easy year for him either, because he put himself on a limb. He made himself lonely from the rest of the team. But he really believed in it. And so having real conviction behind what you want to do. And of course, you've got to actually believe it. Let's be clear. You can't just pursue something because you want it to happen. You really do have to believe in it. But I've always thought, since sort of learning those lessons and kind of being that way, it actually today makes me see that if there's something that I don't really want to do, if I don't quite believe in the people, the team, the product, the market, then I either need to not do it or I need to change it. But don't keep pursuing something that you don't really back, because, well, A, it's not much fun, and the chance of success are significantly diminished.
There's so much there, Dawn. I've written down the unreasonableness of excellence, which is...
That's a good phrase.
I know. I keep going, this could be the title of my next book. But the unreasonableness of excellence, I love that. And I've written down conviction. And the other thing I was just thinking is, when you buy an article of clothing and you really like it, and then like a pair of shoes or something, if you try it on and they don't quite fit right, you've got to trust that instinct to go, I'm sending them back. They'll never fit right. If you think it'll be all right, it won't be. Your first instinct was the right one. And you learn as you get older. There is a point where there is an essence of, call it insight, call it whatever we will, but I've ridden this horse long enough to now to go, if my instinct, but that instinct comes from what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I'm feeling. It's still data. It's a cumulative response, isn't it? I'm also now want to pick up another thing you said before we get into some other conversation, which is you talked about being able to bring a difference to HG and having the colleagues that you respect and very much kind of operating as peers, but just recognising that maybe you're bringing a different ingredient to the cake. I'd love to hear you talk about, from your perspective, this is where I think, amongst other value adds that I bring, that is why maybe I came with an element of difference. Yeah.
Well, first of all, there is the educational background, as I've probably touched on that bit before. But from a skill set perspective, the folk that I work with in HG and just sort of generally the industry of private equity, it's a highly... it's full of people that are incredibly smart. Their skill set tends to be highly analytical. And I guess if you're saying what it tends to be more of, you'd also have to counterbalance what does it tend to be less of. So my experience has been that there is less people intuition, if I can phrase it like that. And obviously most people that are professional investors have never run companies. So they don't know what it feels like to actually be at the coalface, to deal with customers, to deal with employee situations. So what I bring into HG is a different set of lived experiences, a difference in educational experience, and I suppose behavioural-wise, I'm always going to over-index in an HG environment on how I think about people, how I think about developing teams, how I look at them as individuals, as groups together. And I think HG will look at them as... that they will look at them as components that will deliver an investment outcome. I don't mean that they don't care about people, by the way, or that they don't have any EQ in any way. But the difference that I bring is I over-index on EQ. They will probably over-index on IQ. And I think that's probably a good summary way of describing. And of course, if you're joining an organisation where you aren't sort of like the mainstream of their characteristics and skill sets and whatever, inevitably you can feel on the outside. So you have to find a way to break in. And that's why I mentioned the values, I think, when I was saying about it earlier, is as long as you've got a common set of values, you can actually make the differences so work to your advantage. And I've been doing it 6 years now, so I feel like I've probably proven that I can make it work in an environment that feels really alien. And hopefully what I can do is I can help solve things in a way that they might not have solved otherwise. And so I think it's real value add for an organisation to have people that are different, but you need tolerance on both sides. So I have to be tolerant when I think they're overlooking people-related issues and they're focusing purely on analysis. I have to find a way to get comfortable and help I have to make my voice heard. And equally on their side, they have to be tolerant that I'm not going to come and try and solve a solution with a spreadsheet. I'm going to approach it in a very different way. So I think, you have to be a as the person that's coming into an organisation where you're not the norm, you have to be willing to compromise, you have to be willing to be tolerant, but the organisation also needs to have tolerance and patience with you as well. And I would say over the 6 years that I've been with HG, we found really good common ground, and those differences have become integrated. So now it's really valuable. And now there's a lot more operators around HG as well. And I spend a lot of my time with the people that we describe as the deal guys. That's the investors and girls as well, by the way. Guys being generic. But I spend a lot of those time trying to help them develop empathy with management teams for the companies that they're investing in. And I feel when I'm successful at that, I feel like it helps them become better investors. I'd love to have them on the podcast as well to ask them, how does it feel when I try to help them evolve and change, whether they actually do think it adds value. But collectively, we seem to be delivering good results together, and we have fun along the way. So I think it's working.
I guess there's got to be some scores on the doors. What I mean by that is compromise is partnership, right? But I also noticed that you're given leeway possibly up until the point where it doesn't validate itself. So there had to be validations. You had to have a confidence that said, I'm not wrong. That's key, that what you're talking about isn't just, particularly in the PE space, it's not just an ideology. You're actually saying, well, there might be an element of ideology to it. However, it does manifest in certain things. Where does the value come? Is it in the journey, the quality of the conversations that allow us as investors to have the tougher conversations? It's actually at point of sale, Guy, it has a value. Where does it manifest?
Yeah, well, maybe best way is to give an example. So I'd been with HG for about 5 months. An investment that they had was not going particularly well. And in fact, it was not going well at all. And the partner that was looking after it said, hey, could you go and meet the management team down there and, have a bit of an assessment, chat to them, and I'd value your opinion. So I was like, hey, fantastic, great to be asked. So I went and spent some time with this team, and I'll accelerate the story here. I ended up taking over this business as the CEO, and in less than a year got this business to be in a good shape, got a fantastic team in place, and some of that team was, in fact, most of the team were already there, but I supplemented it with some extra people. I helped those people create belief in themselves that they could do this, that the product was super viable, which it was, and that the market really needed it, which it did. And a year down the line, ended up turning that into a very successful outcome from where it was. So I think for me, that was the helpful validation point that I needed within HG to be able to prove that you can take somebody from a different background, put them in the private equity firm, because during this time I had half a foot in HG and a half a foot in the company. So I was sort of doing two things at once. But by taking them on the journey, by them seeing the success that you could have by influencing people, building the right team, communicating in the right way, giving the management team confidence, skills, tips, helping them learn how to actually operate their company in the right way from an investor point of view, it meant that we could sell it in the right way. So that for me was kind of, it was almost like my BAA moment that I'd had in Capita. This was my moment in HG where a year in I was able to validate that an operator could take an investment, could transform it, and could ensure that a successful outcome happened for the fund. And you then start to build from there. And that was really what I did.
And I see that in you, when you work with somebody such as myself, that room to manoeuvre to say, you're going to be the counsel, you're going to be the mentor, and then bringing somebody in the margins to maybe do work specific level with the team. That's proving itself, right? So from that point of view, I guess it gives you then more leeway, more credibility.
Yeah.
I'm sensing then that has an influence within the organisation, that other people look over the fence and go, I may not be a Dawn, but what's the version of that I can bring into myself? And that also has a domino effect within your own organisation. So I'm sensing that you've seen a difference and a shift, not just that they've given you room, but others may be adopting as well.
Yeah, and I think, if you look at one of the key strategies today of HG about how do we make sure that we drive fantastic investment outcomes, it is by delivering operational transformation of the companies that we invest in. So, that's what we want to do, is we want to build fantastic companies. But very often, in order to be able to do that, you've got to help transform them, whether that's about scale or technology, new technology, or maturing the way they work. You've got to transform them to make better companies going forward. And I think I wouldn't take credit in any way for me being the only catalyst here within HG, but it was a helpful catalyst for them to see that, hey, when you get the right operational person involved, businesses can transform, become better, and then you therefore get a better investment outcome. And so, I found myself in, again, I was about to say lucky, and then I was about to tell myself off. So it wasn't lucky, but what was lucky was going in there in the first place to this particular business. And again, in the same way I credited Paul, this particular partner at HG that asked me to help, I credit him with going, well, that was good, because actually he asked me, can you go and spend some time with my team? Can you try and figure this out? Can you help me? And I think, that's brave, isn't it? To bring a new person in that's a bit different and ask them to help solve what is quite a big problem. So all things like this are never about an individual. It's always about individual people, but it's a group of individuals that, all have a role to play along the way. And that particular partner in HG was the good luck bit for me, that he was prepared to back me.
He saw something. If he'd seen the wrong thing, he wouldn't have asked you, right? So when it comes to a point of sale with a company, certain things are multipliers. Where does the assessment of a team, not just in terms of its technical competence and its knowledge of its market, but where does the experience they're having of, yes, the quality of the individuals, but also the way that they operate, call it the camaraderie, call it the connection, it doesn't necessarily require friendships. And I'm just wondering, has there been a sense of change, or actually, no, it's still pretty well the hard financials and that's on the periphery, or actually, no, that's becoming more relevant? I wonder if you've picked up on, seen or noticed that.
Yeah, well, again, I can speak for HG clearly that it is absolutely relevant. I mean, it's essential, and I think it always has been. I think there are more scientific or analytical ways of measuring it nowadays that they are using, but I think it's always been important. And the dynamic between a management team, if I were looking at my investment checklist, there is a really big section on people and the management team. So there'll be a section on all about the employees and the engagement and the activities that they provide for the workforce and all the metrics that are associated with that, turnover, time to hire, all of those. They're all there. That's a given. It's a baseline. But there is more effort, I think, now put on the dynamic between a management team. How do they work together? What are the gaps? Who's overbearing? Who seems quiet and in the background? And when we are making our investment decisions, we are absolutely having a dialogue around teams and people. And sometimes it might be, you might see a gap and we might already be thinking who might be able to plug that gap. Or somebody might be telling you they're leaving, so they're going to be leaving, so you've got to start plugging the gap. But it's absolutely a fundamental part of our investment making decision that we are backing a team of people, or we're going to back a team that we know we need to supplement. But never would we go into an investment where we felt there wasn't a good team. Because ultimately what we're doing is we're looking after the responsibility of pensioners' investments, their future. We've got their pension money and we've got to invest it wisely. And whilst we might be a tech investor and you would think all of our focus must be on technology, we know that behind great technology is always great people, and the two can't be separated. So we have to have confidence in our ability to assess people, and sometimes you don't get the opportunity to do that formally when you're making an investment because it might be a competitive situation. So each and every interaction, dialogue you're having with a potential management team, you need to have the confidence as an investor to be able to start making judgments and start forming an opinion just based on conversations, because, as I say, you don't get the chance always to formally assess people. So, yes, it's really important to investors to make sure they're backing a good team. It's important to make sure they understand the dynamic of the individuals within that team. And it's also important not to judge them for the situation they're in today, because invariably we're investing in a business because we want to grow it or scale it or change it or make it bigger. So part of the assessment is, can those individual people, good as they maybe have been in the past and they may be today, can they actually scale their competence and their leadership credentials alongside the ambition that the investor has got for the company? And again, that's a really, that's hard to do. So you need to, I sort of try and help my investor colleagues. I'm not saying I'm expert at this, by the way, but I'd like to think that I've got some competence in this area. So it's a challenge that I'm always putting to my investment colleagues and try to help them come up with a good answer for that, or an educated answer.
There's something about when an investment goes in, there's that initial euphoria maybe of we've purchased it, being purchased. That's a great achievement. I always get a sense then that nitrous oxide, like in a car engine, gets kind of put into the business. So what is it that says if you don't do this as a team in the first 12 months, you're probably going to come a cropper?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing, and I'd go back to something that I said before, you first of all got to believe that the growth is deliverable. Let's say it's growth at your or transformation, it could be either. But you've got to believe in the place that you're trying to get to is achievable, and you've got to believe it's the right thing to do. And then you need to make sure that all of the individual members of that team are completely aligned behind it, and that they've got trust in one another, that each person in the team has probably got an individual component part to play, and that you've got to trust all the components to work. So the components have got to go in the right direction at the right pace, and you've got to rely on each other. And I think that's probably the thing, that when you do a new investment and you've got a big period of change, transformation, high growth, etc., you've got to make sure that you've got, I think people would describe it as, you've got to have the dressing room with you. So you just got to, so the thing that you need to do a lot of in those early days is over communicate with people. You've got to really be clear about where you're going, why you're going there, how you're going to get there, what it means for them, what you expect of them. So it's actually invariably, as you say, it's not about getting smarter. It's probably not about changing the product. It's probably not about doing anything different with their market, but it is about the way they work with each other. And I think that's why you need people with good people skills around at this time, because I know from doing lots of M&A deals, when you buy a company, the people in that company often say, oh, we've got a new owner, everything's going to change. Now, some might be going, woohoo, embrace that. Others might be just thinking, oh my God, I hate change, what does it mean? And they're really scared. But often, not a lot happens very quickly. If you're further down in the organisation, maybe if you're in the leadership team, it feels different on day one. But for people that are delivering to customers and clients, and they're actually delivering the service or product, things very often take a little while longer to change. And they can be disappointed actually that there's no change. So again, in the early stage of doing a new investment, over communicating with everybody what the plan is, the pace of change, how it's affecting them, and as I say, what you expect of them by way of contribution, that for me is one of the keys of success, that you've got to be good at doing that. And I have seen over my career, so I'm just saying over 30 years here, I have seen lots of people not do that very well. They can be really smart, they can have a brilliant thesis, but actually when it comes down to dealing with individual people, teams of people, they don't communicate clearly the plan, the expectation, and what's going to happen. And yeah, so for me, that's a really important thing to never overlook. And if you're an investor, you should always be thinking, who have I got in the team, or in my own team, or in the team I'm in? Who's going to be the driver of all of that? Who's going to be the person bringing it together? And it's an intangible, so it's not easy to put your finger on, but you need somebody on the ground that is going to do that and do it really well.
And I don't know if I'm about to use the right word, so please supply a better one if I use the wrong one. But if I was going to say the word oversight, but when you have an investor who is at the very least paying attention to what you're doing with expectations of having a finger on the pulse, call that oversight or interest or whatever it is, how easy is it for people to adjust to having others who are paying attention, where for many years they've not had that? because they've very much been playing in their own pond. Is that usually a very easy transition, or not always, because there's a struggle there maybe with sense of control or the influences that they have?
Yeah, well, I think the thing is when you're investing in a company, I think there's a difference between investing in a company and versus acquiring a company that you're going to kind of take over and run. So I think it depends on the situation. If you're investing in a company, you're backing the management team to carry on doing a great job. You're not going to try and do it for them. So you'll try and supplement their knowledge, their skills, maybe with some learned experience from another similar situation. But the way in which you'll communicate that is it's definitely you're in charge, you're running the show, but here's some tools, some tips, some experiences that you might benefit from. And I think it needs to be done in that way. So you haven't got somebody arriving and telling you how to do your job, how to run your company. And I think that's very important. I think if you're doing it the other way, where you are completely acquiring a company or you're taking it over, then that is different. But you will have probably, if you're selling your business into that situation, you'll have understood up front that change is going to come and it's going to come fast and hard, and I better be able to adapt to that if it's my company, because that's what I've sold into. So I think, again, different types of situations, but it's always important, whichever side of the equation you're on in any of that you understand what the circumstance is that you're going into. Is it a takeover? Is it an investment and back? And you act accordingly.
If I talk about women in leadership, I don't know if you notice it, sense it, people must look to you. There must be people now that you have enough experience, you're known enough in an organisation or an industry. Do you have a sense of how you help that agenda move forward?
Yeah, well, quite honestly, I feel it's a massive responsibility and it's a privilege to be in that position where, if people are looking up at you as a role model of any gender, then I'm firstly very happy about that. But I feel like I want to jump into Gremlins, actually. Is it Mr. Miyagi that says something about with responsibilities? You know that phrase in the film?
Yeah, Spider-Man.
Yeah. No, Gremlins.
Oh, I thought it was when he said with great power comes great responsibility. Yeah. That's definitely Spider-Man.
Is it Spider-Man? Okay, well, anyway, that phrase really resonates with me, actually. So it is a big responsibility and you have to take it very, very seriously. And I do try always to make sure that I kind of live up to the expectation of being a really good role model, and that means always act appropriately, always do the things that I say that I'm going to do, continually empathise with whoever it is I'm talking to as much as I possibly can to try and see things through their eyes, through their experience. And try to act accordingly. But it is it's a blast actually being a role model. And when you get to influence people in a really positive way and you then see them doing well as a result of it, I just go, yay, they are my best days at work. In one of the companies at the moment that I'm chairing, it's called Team Blue. It's a hosting and master domain names web services company spread across Europe. It's a big company in 18 different countries. But one of the things that I've recently taken upon myself with the chief exec is that we are mentoring a group of young people in the organisation that have been nominated as future stars. And between him and I, we have a monthly session with this group of young people where we're trying to teach them, not to coach them, but to actually give them some new skills. So a session that we ran just last week was on how to use influence at work. The month prior to that, we were helping them figure out why it was important and how to build a network. And, so it's kind of those sorts of skills that we're teaching them. But the reason I mention it is that I feel in this group, I've got a massive responsibility to show these people what good looks like. And if I don't do it well, that's just going to be a disaster for them and for me. So you kind of, like I say, with these positions of being role models or, people that are being looked up to, you've got to actually be really good at what you do. And you better not let those people down, And I think back to Paul Pinder again, and I kind of go, he was my role model. He had loads to teach me, and I benefited massively from that. And if I could just be 1/10 of what he was to other people that he was to me, then I would be very, very happy. And I think specifically to your question on women in leadership, I'm a big believer in that women should help other women. And there's a famous quote from Madeleine Albright that she said, there's a special place in hell for women that don't help women. I feel like that's so true. And I desperately want to help more women, find their voice. I coach at the minute, or mentor probably 10 young upcoming superstar females who are all smarter than me, have got more potential than I ever had. But I would say almost without exception, they all need to work on their personal presence and confidence. And that makes me sad, actually, that that's the case. However, because I recognise that in them, because I feel like I've been through that myself, I feel that I've got something to offer them. So I am doing my damnedest to help those people find their voice, to develop that confidence so that they can go on to have long-term, successful and happy, and that's key, happy careers where they feel fulfilled. And I think women that are in senior roles, that are old like I am, it's almost like an obligation. We need to do this. We absolutely need to all do our bit to contribute to try and drive more equality in diversity. And it's not just about gender. There are so many different ways in which diversity needs to become more equalised. But seeing as how you asked me about the gender thing, I'm just focusing on that in that answer.
I'm quite fascinated, actually, by that finding your own voice, holding space. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, actually, but I've come to a bit of a conclusion that, of course, you've got your growth in the organisation, but actually really focus on your growth outside of it. Because there is something here about, actually, this isn't just about you being able to wear the veneer of professionalism. This is about your growth as a human being, which is your whole life. So the person standing in front of people is experienced, is mature. And I think men do have, by propensity, a more bluff and bravado capability to be able to show confidence, to give the impression of competence. I do see that. But I think one of the big equalisers is actual just personal growth and giving that person that sense of it's not just about the workplace, it's about you growing. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm a great believer in this whole bring your whole self to work. So actually, I think I'm completely the same when I'm at, my kids would say, you're the same at home, mummy. Everything is a spreadsheet, everything is a PowerPoint, but I don't think it is.
I noticed the flip chart in the corner of the room. Right, kids?
I am fairly consistent at home and at work. So, I think, bringing your whole self to work is really important. And, I do lots of things. I touched on at the beginning when I was doing my little brief intro about sport. And I think, I don't do any sport at work, but out of work, it's a really important part of my life. And I think being healthy, being fit, and I'm not competitive, by the way. I don't do any competitive sport, but I compete with myself. God, when I'm doing my 50th lap of the swimming pool, which I try to do a few times a week, I always want to beat my own time. So I am massively competing with myself all of the time. But I think, and I feel like I'm quite a good swimmer. And therefore, I'm quite confident in my ability out of work. So I think whether it's being a mum, whether it's my sport, I'm also on the board of a charity, which again is so important to me. And it crosses over into my workspace all the time, even though you'd think, how could it? But I think having a full and balanced life in work, out of work, that is all the sorts of things that help you develop personal confidence in a multitude of environments. I still find it's really funny, actually. If you asked me to stand up and present to 10,000 people today, as long as it was on a subject that I knew, I'd be quite comfortable to do that. But if you asked me to go into the school playground and talk to lots of the mums there about the next PE match or something like that, then, that's more scary for me.
I just noticed somebody's come in and is unzipping their coat
and
brought the
did you hear that?
groceries.
Sorry, noise in the background. The peril of working from home.
That's hilarious. It happens all the time. Just as we come to a close, somebody's looking at what could I do to elevate myself? Definitely read those or some podcasts that you pay attention to or a top tip that says, listen, just every week, ask yourself this question. What have you got that you could potentially offer?
Well, I'm going to recommend your book of Living Brave.
Boom, boom. There you go.
Boom. I hope everybody has read that. Is that all right? Was that the right plug to get in there?
Well done.
But again, joking aside, apart from your book,
Of course.
I'm generally not one for reading lots and lots of books, and that's more driven by time rather than desire. And maybe when I retire, I'll have more time, but then it will be too late to learn those skills. I don't know. But anyway, so I'm not a big reader of lots and lots of books, and I tend to always look to myself just to make sure that I'm always learning. I read the newspaper every day, and that is kind of my go-to. I like to know what's going on in the world. I like to therefore feel that I can have conversations about what's going on in the world, and I think lots of other people don't do that. So I think that's pretty important, that you are very aware of the world around you. And then in terms of sort of personal mantras, I just don't think I have any. I mean, I'm naturally a very positive person, and I think if there was one thing that I could leave all of your listeners with, is kind of always make the best of everything and look on the bright side of things, and always be half full, not half empty, because no matter what is going on, there is always something that you can hang on to that's positive, even if it feels completely overwhelming. The only positive might be that one day it's going to be over, or one day you're going to have learnt to live with it, or one day you'll have moved on. And for me, on a personal level, always making the most of every day in a positive way is probably the thing that makes me most happy. And when I'm more happy, I'm more successful. And when I'm more successful, then I'm more happy. So I just think kind of be yourself, be positive. There's no point in being miserable. So that's probably my worst answer, actually.
I think it's gold dust.
It's just the way I live my life.
I think it's a T-shirt. So listen, I'm going to bring us to a close. I'm going to say thank you so much. I'm going to get just down for a few moments to make sure everything's uploaded. But just thank you so much for the time, because I know it's hugely valuable. If I was listening to this, I'd have taken a lot from it. Thank you so much from me and anybody that's listened. Really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and thank you to anyone that's listening, apart from my mum, because I know she will be.
Well, there's only 3 listeners, so you know what, it's okay. Right. I'll press the stop button. All right, take care. That's it, so I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.